Well, I would like to start by traveling back in time. It's May 1998. I'm at a petrol station on the outskirts of Dublin, beside the call centre where I work part-time. But I'm not getting petrol. And I'm not going to work anymore either. I'm not able to. I'm lying on my back on the cold, hard tarmac, breathing in to a brown paper bag. I think I'm having a heart attack. I'm not. I'm having a panic attack. But it will take a few more months and a lot more panic attacks before I get that diagnosis. Back in the 90s, nobody talked about mental health. But I did eventually find support from an amazing psychotherapist. Over time, she taught me coping mechanisms, and I learned to breathe again. But I knew that I couldn't be honest about it in work, because back then the topic of mental health really was taboo. Most companies didn't have employee assistance programs, employee resource groups, mental health first aiders, and other support structures. But today, thankfully, most do. So let's take a moment. Before we look at how far we still have to go, let's first look at what we have achieved already. Today, we are seeing compassionate leaders right across the world investing in innovative employee well-being programs. And many of those change makers are here today at the World Happiness Summit. Back in my brown bag breathing days, I could never have imagined that one day there would be an entire conference dedicated to happiness and well-being, and that leading experts from the worlds of academia, business, and mental health would flock to this one incredible occasion. As I look back at the leaps and bounds that have been made during my lifetime when it comes to workplace well-being in particular, and when I look back also on my own career, I can see that various dots have connected along my path to bring me here with all of you today. My past dots encompass my lived experience, all the commercial experience I've gained throughout my 25-year career, and a recent master's degree in psychological and behavioral science, which opened my mind up to the incredible research that exists in the academic world. I have been so fortunate to make connections with various well-being experts, not least of all the distinguished co-founders of the World Wellbeing Movement, who you've already heard from this weekend, the amazing Lord Richard Layard, and if you have not signed his manifesto yet, please make sure you do so, and Professor Jan-Emmanuel Deneve. And I am so grateful that they believed in me enough to partner with me on achieving our mission of putting well-being at the heart of decision-making in both business and public policy. And from where I'm standing today, I see so many more connections that can be made. But the truth is, I'm sort of seeing a sea of dots, not unlike how the audience is represented in this image. Each dot, each one of you, brings a wealth of knowledge. But we are nothing without connection, which, of course, is the theme of this summit. I recently had the opportunity to interview the brilliant founder of the World Happiness Summit, the inspiring lady that is Karen Guggenheim. She shared with me her thoughts on the collective power of bringing together such a diverse group of change makers for this incredible event. Here's just a snippet of what she said.
My hope is that we can come together and have a watershed moment so that we can positively transform the world. We know enough now. We know what to do. We have data, and we can act.
Wonderful words, wise words from an incredible woman. So let's make that watershed moment happen. Because right now, I'm still looking out over a sea of dots, but I would like to look out over a sea of connections. So can I ask you all, please, to stand up? And in the boxes as well, please, if you can stand up. And silently this time, I'd like you to find a stranger, somebody you don't already know. If you're in a box, find the person you know least well. And what I'm going to ask you to do for about 15 to 20 seconds, just in silence, I want you to stare into that stranger's eyes. And as you do so, I want you to try to understand them. Try to understand what they've been through. Okay, is everybody in position? Are your eyes locked? Okay, ready, steady, stare. Okay, you can all sit down now. But if you feel that you have made a meaningful connection, be sure to swap contact details after this. Because if we want to achieve that watershed moment that Karen talked about, we will need to work together to solve the workplace well-being paradox. You see, although a lot of progress has been made, we do still find ourselves facing a paradox. On the one hand, we're seeing a sharp rise in investments in workplace well-being by employers across the world. This is most visible, firstly, by the number of jobs with the word well-being in the title. I had a look at Indeed's recruitment website, and there's about 100 jobs with the word well-being in the title currently open in the UK alone. Sorry, 1,000 jobs currently open in the UK alone. And that's just 8 years after the first appointment I can find of a corporate chief well-being officer, and that wonderful lady is here today, and she's speaking a bit later as well. So it's not surprising with this rise in well-being roles that surveys say that the percentage of companies with a comprehensive employee well-being strategy is steadily rising year on year. On the other hand, however, we are counterintuitively also seeing a rise in the indicators of employee stress and unhappiness. Gallup tells us that employee stress is at an all-time high. The McKinsey Health Institute tells us that employee burnout is at an all-time high. And Deloitte tells us that the cost of mental health-related absences to UK employers alone is about £56 billion a year. The dots between investments in employee well-being and indicators of employee happiness do not seem to be connecting. Which begs the question, what's causing this workplace well-being paradox? And are our investments in employee well-being wasted? Well, sadly, in many cases, the answer is yes. William Fleming, a research fellow at the University of Oxford's Wellbeing Research Centre, examined data from over 27,000 UK employees and found that various corporate wellbeing initiatives, including mindfulness classes, yoga classes, and resilience training, had no effect on mental health. Now, this research does contradict previous studies on individual interventions, but it's not saying that the interventions don't work in the right context, and it's not saying that these interventions shouldn't be rolled out at all. Rather, it is highlighting that far too many companies are not properly connecting the dots when they do roll out such initiatives. Now, this paradox reminded me of a poignant quote from the UK's 2020 Commission for Equality in Mental Health report. They said, "We risk continuing the cycle of expanding mental health services without taking the steps to reduce the need for them." I would adapt that quote for the future of work, because I believe that if we don't learn to connect the dots properly, we risk continuing the cycle of investing in workplace well-being initiatives without fully understanding the drivers of employee well-being and without taking the steps to reduce the need for those very support structures in the first place. Of course, it's not always easy to connect the dots. And I'd like to illustrate that with a simple puzzle. So if you have a pen and paper, can I ask you to please draw a square with 9 dots inside it, like you see on the screen here. I see some of you scrambling for your pen and paper there. So a square with 9 dots in it. If you don't have a pen and paper, that's okay. You can do this in your head as well. So this lady in the front is on dot number 6. I'm going to let her get to dot 9. She's done her 9 dots now. So starting at any dot, I want you to draw 4 straight lines connecting all the dots without lifting your pen from the paper. I'll say that again. Starting at any dot, draw 4 straight lines without lifting your pen from the paper. I'll give you a few seconds. And I have a bird's eye view of your efforts here. Now, some of you will have seen this puzzle before. If you have, keep your hand down. But if this is your first time seeing this puzzle, and if you've been able to solve it, can I ask you to put your hand up, please? A lady in the front. Congratulations. I'm afraid I don't have a prize, but well done, because you figured out that in order to solve this puzzle, you literally need to think outside the box. In fact, some say this puzzle is the origin of that phrase, because the solution lies in drawing those lines outside of the square. But how can we think outside the box to solve the workplace well-being paradox? Well, we cannot simply treat well-being in isolation. There are so many factors that drive our well-being at work, so many dots that need to connect if our company cultures are going to align with our well-being benefits. Because in far too many companies, we're still seeing a disconnect between the company's overall culture and their suite of well-being benefits. That disconnect becomes obvious when companies roll out paid paternity leave, but new dads don't take it up for fear of being seen as not committed or being overlooked for promotion. That disconnect is obvious when companies offer yoga classes and mindfulness classes, but most employees either don't have the time to attend at all or only have the time to attend sporadically because their workload is simply unrealistic and overly demanding. There are many examples of these disconnects between company culture and well-being benefits, and I know that I'm preaching to the choir here today, but if we stand any chance of solving the workplace well-being paradox, we need to take an organizational level approach to our well-being strategies. In fact, the UK's NICE Mental Health at Work guidelines go a step further. They recommend taking a preventative and proactive approach. And that's really important because far too many employee well-being benefits today are reactive, i.e., they are only targeting those employees who are actively suffering from mental health challenges, which, according to Gallup, is about 15% of the population. But a further 58% are struggling and therefore at risk of tipping over into that suffering space. Shouldn't our corporate well-being strategies support all employees and not just those who are worst off? But how do you take an organizational level approach? Well, you've got to think outside the box like this lady. And that means, as if you saw Professor Jan Emmanuel Denev's talk yesterday, you will know that you need to not only ask how your employees are feeling, but you also need to ask why they are feeling that way. It is, of course, imperative to measure employee well-being metrics, to measure what you treasure. After all, you cannot manage what you don't measure. As Jan highlighted yesterday, we recommend measuring the 4 key dimensions of employee well-being: job satisfaction, happiness at work, stress at work, and sense of purpose. But that really is only the first step, because that only tells us how people are feeling, and it gives us no indicators as to why they are feeling that way. To figure that out, we need to think outside the box and connect a lot more dots. Because there are a lot of factors or drivers that drive our sense of well-being at work. Our work environment and conditions, our manager, our sense of belonging, our sense of appreciation, whether the work we do is energizing, whether we have flexibility, autonomy, trust, scope to learn and grow. There are a lot of dots that need to connect. And employers should be rolling out interventions aimed at improving each and every one of these drivers of employee well-being. Of course, we are diverse, so different drivers will impact each of us differently. As a woman in business, my sense of belonging is absolutely fundamental to my sense of well-being. One simple but science-based behavioral intervention to drive a sense of belonging is the approach that Accenture took a few years ago now with their Women on Walls project. Addressing the behavioral insight that you cannot be what you cannot see, they sought to make the contributions of female leaders visible by representing them in imagery on the walls of various public and private sector buildings in Ireland, often for the first time. Now, maybe I like this one because it was in Ireland. It was a few years ago now, but the reason I do love it is because what they did here was they took an evidence-informed behavioral insight and they translated that into real-world impact. And that's not always easy to do, because far too often empirical insights, evidence-informed insights, are still hidden in echo chambers, and they are not getting into the hands of those people who are best positioned to apply those learnings and actually roll out initiatives aimed at driving real-world impact. And that's something that we're really focused on at the World Wellbeing Movement. From our home within the University of Oxford's Wellbeing Research Centre, we're aiming to connect the dots between the world's leading well-being experts and those people who are best positioned to bring that research to life to positively transform our world. People like business leaders and people like policymakers. And it's so important that we get these cutting-edge insights into the hands of these people, because these are the people who are going to make the changes. We need to get this research into the hands of CEOs, CFOs, CHROs, and frankly, all employees. There is no good this research sitting in some niche academic journal that is typically only read by academics. But we need to go a step further. We need to make this research available in an easy-to-implement, accessible format, and we need to commission more research to fill the gaps. And that's something that we're working on with our coalition of founding members, a group of wonderful, like-minded companies who share our values for advancing well-being in general and well-being in the workplace, because we recognize that our mission of putting well-being at the heart of decision-making in both business and public policy is so essential that no one organization can achieve that in isolation. That's why we are a movement, and that's why Richard has a manifesto that every single one of you is going to sign. Now, I see a lot of dots in this room today. So before I wrap up, let me just connect the dots for you. Have a look at the painting on the screen. What do you see? Now, some of you have figured this out already, but it's Sunday morning on the day that the clocks changed, so I'm going to help you. I'll zoom in to reveal a painting made up entirely of and connected by dots. In art, as in life, there are dots everywhere. But it is only when they join up to form connections that we can create something special, something transformational, something revolutionary. So, before you all go back to your normal lives, take the opportunity of being at this incredible event. Today, you stand here a dot, but to your left, to your right, in front of you, and behind you are connections. And it is those connections that are going to help us achieve that watershed moment that Karen talked about so that we can positively transform the world. Thank you.